Welcome everyone to the UC Davis Global Energy Managers Workshop. I checked our pre-registration list and we have about 200 people joining us today. We have energy managers and professors and students from really around the country, universities around the whole globe. And we also have energy professionals from the private sector, from the national labs, lots of utilities, and so we're really excited that you're joining us here today. This is the lunch and informal chat session with Energy Rockstars. You can see them up there, Jill Anderson and Ralph Cavanagh. We're holding this event on October 7th, which is Energy Efficiency Day and the California Clean Air Day. In 2019, the UC Davis faculty and staff launched an initiative called Sustainable Campus, Sustainable Cities, and we're working together to achieve a carbon neutral campus by 2025. But our goal is also to serve as a model for other campuses and cities in sustainable operations. Since UC Davis is the size of a small city and operates its own utility system, we have a unique opportunity to help develop and implement solutions using our campus as a living lab. The initiative has 4 key areas, and the first is progress, where we want to make progress towards carbon neutrality throughout by doing on-campus projects. Staff from our facilities and energy engineering team develop and implement energy efficiency projects in buildings and on campus. The second initiative is research. Many of these campus projects serve as research opportunities for the Energy and Efficiency Institute and its research centers to study technology and systems in real time. Of course, education is a major initiative, and through project-based learning and programs like our Energy Graduate Group, we are engaging faculty and students in research and projects as we transform the campus into a solutions showcase. And finally, impact. We're partnering with other campuses and organizations like yourselves to share solutions and best practices along the road to carbon neutrality. And that's certainly what today's event is about, so we're glad you can participate. Next slide. You can see we're 4/6 of the way through the sessions today, but it's not too late to register for afternoon sessions. We have 2 great sessions on education. It's vital that we help the next generation of experts move into this field, and please feel free to register on the link that you see there. Next slide, please. So my name is Kelly Kissock. I'm the faculty director of the Energy and Efficiency Institute at the University of California, Davis, and I will be moderating this session. We have great speakers for you. Ralph Cavanagh is the co-director of the energy program at the Natural Resources Defense Council, and Jill Anderson is senior VP of customer service at Southern California Edison, which I believe is the largest electric utility in the country. Their bios can be found on the website, so you can read more about them if you don't already know about them. Next slide, please. So what we'd like to do over lunch today is ask each speaker to provide some introductory remarks, but this is a chat. And so what we'd also like to invite you to do is into the questions link, type your questions, and I'll try to keep track of them, and I'll forward them to our speakers as we go forward. Also want to let you know that this session is being recorded, and we'll make that copy available soon. And finally, there's a short survey at the end that we would ask you to complete. It helps us tune these events to keep them as useful as possible. And finally, if you have any issues during the webinar, please contact our organizers. Okay, next slide. So I think just jump on the title. This is a lunch and chat with an energy rock star. So it's a fair question. What is an energy rock star? And I guess I'd say, you know, a rock star is someone who has national and international appeal. We were just chatting before about people in important organizations in Japan picking up on Jill's blog and rebroadcasting them. A rock star is somebody who can draw a diverse crowd. We've already seen that that's happening right now. And somebody who can captivate an audience and maybe even get them to sing along to a compelling tune. So I know that both Ralph and Jill are rock stars. Ralph has had a career of influencing energy efficiency and clean energy policies in California and across the country. And Jill has a fan base in both Southern California and the New York region for her leadership in advancing clean energy solutions at scale. I'd also like to say on a personal level that I'm thankful for both of their roles in recruiting me, bringing me here to become the faculty director, and certainly for serving on the Energy Efficiency Institute's Board of Advisors, and finally, just for taking their time to share their expertise with us today. So with all that said, why don't we start off with you, Ralph? And if you could make some introductory comments, we'll move forward.
Well, I thank you, Kelly. I think what the audience needs to know about me to just diffuse any excessive enthusiasm in that introduction is that I was introduced to you as the co-director of the NRDC Energy Program, and 41 years ago, in 1979, I joined NRDC as the director of the Energy Program, which might suggest to the less charitable members of the audience that my prospects for advancement within the institution are limited. It would also be fair to say that I'm probably the only person in the world who's had the same job for 41 years. In the category of rock stars, one achievement I would like to call out before I talk about myself is what Jill Anderson and her colleagues managed to do in August and September of this year, not all that long ago, in keeping the Western grid up during two of the worst heat waves in memory at a time of unparalleled stresses across the region, which was achieved through an extraordinary extemporaneous orchestration of numerous resources and parties who had not been known for working effectively together. It is an achievement that hasn't yet been fully recounted because we're still coming to understand all of the dimensions of this, but it is worth calling out at the outset, and I am confident she will be talking about it more before we're done. I was struck when the EPA administrator ungraciously said in a letter to the governor that California's rolling blackouts of August 14th and 15th were unprecedented in scale and scope. He was, of course, wholly wrong except for one thing, that the cooperation, innovation, and common purpose and effort of all of the Western stakeholders who kept the grid going over those weeks and avoided rolling blackouts really was unprecedented in scale and scope. And I hope maybe at some point he'll consider amending and revising his remarks. What I would highlight from what I have been doing over the last 41 years has a couple of dimensions. The first is to note that I joined NRDC when it is, and it still is, an environmental advocacy organization. It was in its first decade of life. It had come into existence in an epic battle with a major utility. The environmental community of that era largely defined itself in terms of epic battles with major utilities. And I assumed in 1979 that I would spend my entire career suing people like Jill Anderson. That has not resulted in any material way from what's actually emerged. And that's in substantial part because I figured out quite early on, and this is now an insight widely shared, that electric and natural gas utilities in the United States were and are potentially vital clean energy partners in a transition that we all want to see carry through all the way to decarbonization. And Southern California Edison is now one of the leading advocates of decarbonization and has done some of the best work in planning on the practical aspects of doing it. If you don't have electric and natural gas utilities engaged in that process, it becomes a great deal more difficult and a great deal more extended. And some of my most rewarding early work in the field was directly engaging with utility leadership on ways to experiment with something that was in 1979 a completely new idea, which was energy efficiency as a system resource, as a way of substituting at lower cost for additional investment in power generation and in infrastructure. And in the past 4 decades, the United States has learned a great deal about how to do that effectively. Our utilities have been among the most important leaders and pioneers and have an international audience now for both what they've achieved and what they're continuing to do. I think that the ongoing project of decarbonization is going to serve only to underscore the importance of energy efficiency and demand response, and to add additional urgency and momentum to the task of clearing away the remaining barriers to making full use of energy efficiency and demand response, not just in the US, but internationally. It was no accident. I've done one other panel today on Energy Efficiency Day. It was with the Edison Electric Institute. My partner there is here, was from Southern California, Edison. And what I think we have a very strong level of agreement that will appear shortly and emerge fully at numerous points in the discussion. We have a pretty clear sense of what needs to be done in terms of regulatory reform with the utility business model, removal of obstacles to utility innovation, investment and partnership in efficiency and demand response, and the entire decarbonization project that's unfolding across the United States. In the West, and in the Western interconnection of the United States in particular, and this is the note on which my introductory remarks will close, we have the added challenge of extreme fragmentation, a grid which is really one giant interconnected machine operating at the speed of light, but with 38 operators with arbitrarily defined fiefdoms. We've got to move toward full integration of that grid. I think Jill and all of her colleagues across the West who kept it up during that period of almost unprecedented stress in August and September took a very important step in the direction of an ongoing process to full Western grid integration. And that, coupled with unleashing all that energy efficiency and demand response can do, are among the best grounds for optimism about our collective enterprise. Let me now turn things back over to Jill, and then Kelly, I know, will direct us in a common discussion.
Thanks so much, Ralph. I really appreciate that reference, and certainly I think we already see a question in from the audience to talk a little bit more about the rotating outages and the issues of August and September. And let me expand on what Ralph just said, and I would say not only was it the partnership that was the hero of the story, but what we saw on great display in this summer, and we will continue to see going forward as we transition to a carbon-free economy, is that it is the customer who is the rock star here. And it is really a heightened understanding and appreciation for the role that the customers are playing in making sure that the grid, which we are transitioning to be clean, is going to be reliable and can be affordable for everyone. And so I wanted to launch off that point and talk for a minute about how we are seeing a carbon-free grid and a carbon-free society be built. And we really look at it at Southern California Edison around 3 pillars. We talk about greening the grid, electrifying transportation, and electrifying buildings. And I'll talk about each of those just briefly, but really from the context of customers that are showing us today already that 2045 carbon-free future is possible. When we look at greening the grid, we know that is critical for us to have, as Ralph just mentioned, more demand flexibility, because we're going to have more intermittent resources, and we need the demand that the customers pull on the grid to be flexible, just like the gas power plants of today and yesterday were very flexible. And in August and September, we saw that was possible. We saw demand response show up in numbers in SCE service territory that were greater than the estimates that they had committed to. And we've seen that we're really just scratching the surface with what's possible in that partnership of our customers in an overall more reliable grid. For example, smart thermostats. We have fewer than 100,000 smart thermostats in SCE service territory that are enrolled in our demand response program. And that's, probably less than 20% of the smart thermostats that are out there. And so working on ways that we can engage customers in demand flexible programs so that it isn't creating any significant burden on what we saw in August and September was a small set of customers that were really doing the lion's share of that flexibility to everyone's benefit. The second pillar that I mentioned is transportation. And it's an area where we know that transportation emissions in California account for more than 40% of the total carbon emissions in the state. It's critical that we continue to electrify and move to zero emission vehicles in California. We're so excited about the governor's executive order that he just signed on making sure that no new internal combustion engines are purchased beyond 2035. And something I wanted to share in that theme, that our customers today are the rock stars. Despite this current economic slowdown, all of the challenges that this global pandemic has put upon every part of our business, our customers are demonstrating that they remain committed to electric vehicles. We launched an electric vehicle medium and heavy duty program a year ago, and we just got approval to expand and really scale up our light duty program. It'll be the largest light duty electric vehicle program in the country. Our medium and heavy duty program has continued to progress despite what you would expect is some potential hesitation from big businesses making commitments to electrify fleets during all of this uncertain time. But in fact, we've been working forward, and we've had several dozen additional commitments from big customers who are working to electrify their fleet, electrify bus transportation, and we're in construction in projects across Southern California to move forward on medium and heavy duty fleet electrification. And then the last area to mention is buildings and electrifying buildings. And here's an area where we still have a lot of work to do, and it's become kind of a connection point between energy efficiency as well. Recognizing that energy efficiency, which has for long been avoiding any use of kilowatt hours, is now evolving to a place of using energy efficiency to avoid greenhouse gas emissions. And that might mean that in some cases, we actually increase the amount of electric technologies that customers are using and make sure that they're using them at times of the day when the grid is the cleanest. And so there I want to again mention a customer Rockstar story where we've been partnering with universities like University of California and Cal State University and others in our service area. And we've created a new program that really is, I think, the next generation of energy efficiency. And instead of incentivizing the customer to reduce kilowatt hours at any time of day, we're incentivizing the customer to reduce their carbon footprint. And in some cases, that's going to mean that those university campuses are electrifying, and they might actually be increasing kilowatt hours at certain times of day, but they're decreasing their gasoline and their natural gas usage. And overall, that's what we need if we're going to achieve at the scale and the speed that's necessary these incredibly important climate goals. And so just thinking about what we have ahead of us and how far we are from that carbon-free and zero or near carbon grid, it can be daunting, but I always come back to these specific real-world, current, present-day examples of our customers who are already in 2045, who are already moving towards or have figured out themselves how to move towards a carbon-free or low-carbon future. And so that, I think, is something that really excites me personally, and we would be happy to talk more about those, and I'm excited to hear more about your questions as we continue our discussion today.
Great, thanks, Jill, and thanks, Ralph. Each one of those introductory comments probably bears 20 or 30 hours of thinking and extrapolation. We've got a question from one of our attendees that was asking for your personal opinions on the role of nuclear going forward, and especially in light of the recent shortages we had. So please.
Well, I'll start, since possibly the questioner is assuming he's going to get or she is going to get a highly skeptical reaction. I have been involved in discussions of the future of nuclear power almost from the beginning of my time at NRDC in 1979. I was a member of the National Academy of Sciences panel on the future of nuclear power, which meant from roughly 89 to 91. My general view is that what I've tried to promote in terms of building a clean energy future is a process that builds a portfolio looking to find the best buys. We don't have unlimited resources, and the issue always is, what's the lowest cost way of achieving the objective and ensuring reliable service? In general, in that competitive framework over the 41 years I've been at NRDC, nuclear power has not fared well. It hasn't tended to prevail in competitive auctions. In the US, we haven't added a lot of reactors over that period. In fact, we may add 2 more. It's the Southern Company in the next couple of years, but they will be outliers in terms of where utility sector investment has gone. And that's not because of theological convictions against nuclear power within the utility sector or the regulatory sector. It's been because, by and large, managers like Jill with budgets to invest have chosen other ways to move toward a clean energy future. That doesn't mean that nuclear power can't make a valuable contribution. In the case of California most recently, it certainly helped that the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant was online while Jill was scrambling to keep the grid up. And I had no cause to regret my role in helping to negotiate a proposal to retire and replace the plant that kept it online through 2025. My own view going forward, people ask me, is nuclear power off the table? And my response is, it's never been off the table in the entire course of my 4 decades of engagement with the utility sector, but it's going to have to win in an increasingly rigorous competitive environment. The ultimate decision makers will be people like Jill, not people like me. So it's kind of important to figure out what she thinks about it. How about it, Jill?
I completely agree that it is a cost question, first and foremost. We have an obligation to make sure that clean energy is affordable and it's accessible for everyone. And that means there's limited amount of funds that are available for us to invest and for us to sign long-term contracts and the way that our market works here in California. You know, we have to prepare for actually having less, as Ralph just mentioned, less nuclear energy available to us. And I don't see that changing in the next decade or even 2 decades when you look at how long it takes to build a traditional nuclear power plant. I'm certainly supportive of continued investment in modular nuclear reactors, smaller nuclear power. You know, we should constantly be doing research and development on what's the next generation of technology. But the truth is that solar power today is coming in cheaper and cheaper every time we do a solicitation. Battery storage is economically competitive against gas, and we've demonstrated that in multiple solicitations already. So other technologies, when you combine them together that provide carbon-free energy, are going to be very, very difficult to beat on a cost basis. And then you have to also consider the concerns of the community. We have similar issues whenever we're looking at transmission build out, and that's why I think we're going to continue to see a combination of both large-scale renewables built and continue to see distributed renewables built, because we have to take into consideration all of those factors as we're expanding the energy that's going to be needed in order to supply a highly electrified future.
Yeah, thank you. You know, from my own perspective, when I see the increasing penetration of renewable energy into the overall mix, the need for the base load type energy like nuclear predominantly is getting smaller because we're getting so much penetration from the other side, and I think that's going to kind of make it an uphill battle for nuclear also. One of the things I'd like to ask is again, when I look at everyone who's on here, a core group of our participants are students, and I'm wondering if you could just speak to students and say, what advice would you give them as they shape their learning opportunities and career opportunities going forward?
Jill, you want to start?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So First, I think this is a great time to be trying out a lot of different places that you might want to work. So we have a great summer internship program at Edison. Many big energy companies do. And I highly recommend trying out places and making sure that, you try out different places. I think it can be attractive to have a really great internship between, you say sophomore and junior year or between graduate school, and then go back to that company over and over again because you've already built the relationship and they're happy to have you back. But now's the time in your career where we should really be trying a bunch of different places, small companies, large companies, startups, big established companies, so that you can figure out what fits best for you when you start out early in your career. And the other piece of advice that I will share is that, I hope that based on the topic today and UC Davis and its great reputation, that many people here are really excited about fighting climate change and clean energy future and all of those things that Ralph and I are both really passionate about. And my suggestion is to make sure that you spend time early in your education or in your career understanding how the whole system works. Not too early focusing on one niche area. And I'll give you solar, for example. Solar is incredibly important today. It's going to be even more important in the future. But even today, it's less than 20% of the energy that's delivered in this state. And in the future, we're talking about it being larger, but it will not be dominant. So we need to understand as, energy engineers, architects, energy managers, wherever you are going with your career, it's always going to be important to understand how the whole system works. And that means, multiple different sources. And then later you can, narrow in and focus if you want to be passionate about solar or battery storage or another area. But at some point, make sure you're spending time understanding the whole system.
I like that advice very much. I will agree also. It's important for those of you who are interested in being part of the clean energy transition to understand and appreciate the increasing importance of utilities as essential partners. I think too many people in the past who were interested in those issues didn't maybe gravitate in that direction. We need you there. We also need you in state regulatory commissions, the groups that oversee utility investment, set policy. They need passionate, engaged, committed, and expert younger talent coming in. Right now, a disproportionate share of the people who work at those places look like me. They'll be retiring soon. This is good news. There will be lots of openings for people with more open minds and a greater willingness to engage over an extended period in transformational change. You're needed badly there too. For those of you who want my job, and I hope there are more than a few, the best advice on breaking into the nonprofits that work on clean energy is to get in as an intern, get in on what is nominally a temporary basis, and then make yourself indispensable. Jill will have a lot more employment opportunities available than we do. In order to get a full-time position, it often helps to find a way to get in on what is nominally just a short-term basis. Don't worry, they'll tell you it's short-term, they'll tell you it's term limited. If you become indispensable, they'll find a way to keep you. That's my tip for the day for the nonprofit sector like me. And then finally, be open to the possibility. There's a whole ecosystem now that utilities like Edison have helped to create, of providers of services, of technology companies, of everything running the gamut from startups to mature consulting companies that have an important role to play in this. There is no single dominant entity. And Jill's advice to try a lot of different things out while you're young is excellent, and will likely get you in touch with a number of the other potential employers that you might want to try out.
Thank you. Those are great pieces of advice. We have a question about this transition towards the full integration of the grid. And Ralph, you brought it up, and the attendee was just asking for if you could elaborate on specific steps that might be taking and stuff. And because this is, you're also a big part of this, Jill, if you would speak to it also.
Yeah, and this has been unexpectedly controversial. And I think here's where a number of those who are part of the extended family of the UC Davis Energy and Efficiency Institute will have a role to play. There are a surprising number of people, for the past decade, have been part of a conversation about why do we have 38 separate little balancing authorities within the Western interconnection, the Western grid, more than the rest of North America combined. Why are we doing that? How does it help with the clean energy transition, and what might we do to get away from it? The short answer is doesn't help at all in the clean energy transition. It results in fragmentation, increased costs of transferring clean energy. It makes it harder to take advantage of the geographical diversity of solar and wind around the West. We have it, I would argue, largely as a historical accident. That's simply the way the grid evolved. Nobody would have done it that way if they'd been thinking about it in advance. The biggest obstacle to ending it formally and moving to one big integrated system is a problem that the obvious candidate for integration has. There are 38 balancing authorities. By far the largest, by far the best equipped, by far the best staffed is one balancing authority, the California Independent System Operator, which accounts for about a fourth of the Western grid in terms of both generation and load. And the problem that the California Independent System Operator has is that its 5 board members are appointed by the governor of California. And the rest of the West, understandably, would prefer a body with a fully independent board with diverse expertise. Don't get me wrong, the board of the California ISO is a superb group of people. The only problem they have in terms of their credibility with the rest of the West is those gubernatorial appointments. Several years ago, a number of us began making the case that what we ought to be doing is transitioning to a fully independent board for the California ISO, overseen by the current board, which almost everyone likes and trusts, but they've got to replace themselves in consultation with stakeholders across the West. And then we will have an entity with a fully independent board that the rest of the West can coalesce around. That single step has been slow to unfold because the California legislature is reluctant to give up that power. So what we're doing while the persuasive process continues is evolving in the direction of a fully integrated grid. Part of it through measures like the ones that Jill was describing with informal cooperation, part with the creation of Western markets under the auspices of something called the energy imbalance market that allow all of the entities in the West to coordinate across these balancing authorities. It's a workaround solution. It's not perfect, but it's moving us in the direction of a system where what you'd like to have is the entire West operating as if it were one fully integrated machine. The power plants that are operating at any given minute are the lowest cost to operate. That will be very good news for wind and solar, which are always the lowest cost power plants to operate. And I think we'll get there. Right now, we're part of the way through, and there is a career, and there are many careers associated with seeing that great enterprise through to the final conclusion, which I hope will be a fully integrated grid under coordinated operation involving the entire Western system with engagement from every utility, every regulator in that vast region.
Yeah, I'll just add, Kelly, that to Ralph to say that what we experienced and what we are going to continue to experience as climate change continues to drive these heat waves and we keep breaking record after record is that the import-export between California and other neighbors was a critical component in determining the days when we were able to squeak by and we didn't have crisis on the supply, and days where we were very short and worried. A lot of that had to do with, access to energy in other states. So to the extent that we can make that less friction is something that will benefit all of the customers.
Let's be very clear on this. The Pacific Northwest kept the lights on in California to a considerable extent over that terrible period by loading an intertie system that accommodates 8,000 megawatts of transfers. That is an example of the kind of cooperation we should all welcome, certainly should not fear. And those who want more emphasis on decentralized, small-scale resources need to understand that it's not either or. A fully integrated Western grid can make more and better use of a host of small-scale decentralized resources, reduce costs and improve reliability for everyone, get you access to more markets, and as Jill says, reduce the friction that in many hours of the year is preventing wind and solar in California from reaching out across the West. And as a result, we have to curtail it. We have to turn off power plants that have zero operating costs because we can't find a market for the power. We shouldn't be doing that.
Agree.
Well, thank you, Ralph. And that's actually a good segue to another question we have, and that is on the more smaller scale distributed one. But Jill, you led in your introductory remarks with a comment about how the customers were the rock stars here, and the impressiveness of the demand response to during this heat wave. And so one of our attendees wants to ask, if we did so well and we have these smart thermostats and auto DR, shouldn't you push that even harder and perhaps even make it mandatory to push temperatures up a few degrees or something like that?
So defaulting customers onto programs, we absolutely see higher participation, right? Anything that's removing an action that a customer has to take is going to make more robust participation in the programs. We do have some areas where we require participation in demand response, and a great example of that is as we're rolling out more charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. If a customer gets an incentive or a rebate from us, they're required to enroll in a demand response program so that during another supply crisis, we could either turn off or reduce the rate at which that car is being charged, in coordination where the customer is aware it's happening. So I think those are examples where default or mandates are going to work. There are others, like a customer goes online, buys a smart thermostat, installs it in their house. It's nearly impossible for me to mandate that they go on to a demand response program because I don't even know that they've done it. If they go in and enroll in a program, then what we do right now is we compensate them. So not all, but a lot of the demand response that participated in August and September, they were paid, or they are on a preferential rate in exchange for their participation. So I think we got to do a mixture of defaults, especially when we're launching new programs and expanding dramatically, like electric vehicles. And we got to continue to make sure that it's economically attractive and fair for the customers so that we're compensating them because they're taking an action. We had business customers that shut down operations early at our request, and that has an economic cost for them, so they should be compensated. So I think it's kind of both sides of that story.
Yeah, thank you for that insight. I kind of like going back and forth between the demand response and the energy efficiency response and the supply side. So here's more of a supply side question. How does the creation of CCAs help or hurt the integration of the power grid for either one of you?
Well, let me say a word in advance on that. And Jill, I think, will reflect more effectively than I can on what I thought was very effective cooperation between the CCAs and Edison during that crisis, which I hadn't seen before. This was an important moment. Where what I've been calling for some time, Kelly, is I think it isn't inherently a problem to have multiple entities involved in resource procurement, but it is very important for there to be coordination and for there to be at least some procurement that is collective on behalf of the whole group, or at least large parts of it. You don't want to treat the California procurement equation as one that's going to be solved. It's got to be solved individually by dozens or even hundreds of counties and municipalities. You want it to be easy to work together. You want it to be easy to identify common benefit, to execute contracts on behalf of multiple entities. We've been a little slow to that, I would say, so far, but I believe that the events of the last couple of months will speed it up. And I took heart from the joint proposal by the Association of California's Community Choice Aggregators to work together with our traditional utilities as part of the integrated resource planning process overseen by the California PUC. That was one of their core recommendations for how to make sure that we didn't get into a resource adequacy hole again. And I think if we do that, we can effectively integrate the capacities of the community choice aggregators and the utilities. But we need to do it.
Yeah, I will add that CCAs is a great example, going back to the other question about default, right? About mandate versus enticement. And You see that CCAs have had a lot of success in growing in California because the customers are defaulted in and then they can opt out. And then as a result, the CCA has a customer base at which it can spread its costs and its operation requirements. And many of them are going 100% green in green rates that they pass on to those customers. So I think in that way, if the question is help or hurt, that's definitely a success story and a positive development in towards advancing to clean energy future. You're putting customers onto a green rate who would otherwise not go in and proactively elect to do so. Similarly, in that vein, we're transitioning customers to time of use rates. We SCE have now over 1 million customers who are on time of use rates, where the most expensive time to use energy is the dirtiest time. So we are trying to push customers into the lowest cost time to use energy is the cleanest time of the grid. And we're defaulting them into those programs, and we're working in partnership with CCAs. The more that the CCAs can model the similar kind of price structures that we're pushing to, continue to advance the clean energy system, I think that we'll continue to be really important partners. And Ralph is absolutely right. During those events, CCAs pushed the same messages that we were pushing out to their customers. They ran their own demand response events. They were very much engaged in making sure we could limit the impact of that crisis.
Well, thank you. And I think that's a great segue into on the demand side where I want to go now. We have the conversation opened with both Ralph, you and Jill, you addressing the recent peak demand event that we had and things, and certainly that's important. But on all the other days of the year that we don't have a peak demand event, we still have very different and rapidly changing electric system in which we're getting more and more renewables, and the shape, the load shape of power that they put into the grid doesn't map to the traditional demand we've had over time. And so we try to make the grid more renewable based, this idea of grid flexibility, okay, and demand responsiveness to push the demand shape into more of a renewable energy shape becomes a bigger deal. Could you speak to energy efficiency and other parts of how we can you see making the grid more flexible to follow the renewable energy demand or production?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that is core to us making sure that the grid's reliable and it's going to be affordable for everyone. If we don't do anything with demand and all we're doing is trying to build enough renewable energy to keep meeting an ever increasing peak, then that's going to become that's the most expensive and least efficient option. So a combination of a continued focus on energy efficiency, where California has led for decades and has demonstrated that we can deliver billions of dollars of savings to customers, is critical. We still have energy efficiency in this state that we should be accessing. And then the demand of flexibility, it's not just about fitting the load shape to the renewables. I think that's certainly a really important point and a big driver. But we got to look at how climate change is creating crises for us on every front. How we are fighting right now, the worst wildfire season in the history of California. And we've been able to demonstrate that using more flexible demand can help locally, not just statewide as the sun is setting, but we had a case in the Labor Day event and a few days following where we're battling the Creek Fire. We had loss of a huge hydro generator, one of SCE's oldest plants, a very important asset for California, and we started to run into transmission problems as a result of all of the wildfire. At this point now, we're beyond the heat wave statewide, but now you have a local problem, and that's where we were able to deploy local demand response, asking customers through contracts, through compensation, things that we had already in place, and we were able to avoid, a system issue that could have been created as a result of a huge wildfire. So I think that flexibility is not just going to be in the 1 in 10 or 1 in 3 or however often we're going to have these huge heat waves. it's going to be in this climate crisis, which is year round now. And we don't even, I don't think, fully appreciate how big and how challenging climate change is going to be for us in the next 10, 20 years.
Just a couple of quick additions to that answer. Another way to help make loads more flexible in ways that are painless to customers is by incorporating the flexibility mentioned fully into our efficiency standards for new equipment and buildings. That's a priority now of the Energy Commission, and rightly so. I also want to emphasize, though, Kelly, that I think there's still a lot of energy efficiency worth doing that doesn't fit the classic flexibility paradigm. A couple of examples. The issue of seasonal storage, of how to cope with a system that has vastly more renewable energy available to it in the summer than the winter, is not a matter of simply moving demand around from minute to minute. It's going to require measures and initiatives that extend over multiple weeks and months, and we've got efficiency measures that can do that. It will also, as we move to decarbonization, turn out to be incredibly important to continue driving down overall loads in buildings, equipment, and in transportation, because the lower the overall loads, the less the cost and reliability challenges associated with essentially electrifying everything and having a grid that can stand up to that. And for my utility friends, I'm increasingly trying to get people like Jill, and she doesn't need me to ask her to do this, but others do, to pay attention to end-use efficiency opportunities in the transportation sector. I was at Edison when John Bryson, who founded NRDC and then went on to be CEO of Edison, he's the only person on earth with those combined credentials, took me for a ride in a GM EV2, which was designed 20 years ago and got 4 miles a kilowatt hour. The fleet average for electric vehicles today is 3.4 miles per kilowatt hour. That's not a brilliant record of improvement. We tend to assume that just because something's electric, it must be efficient. Nobody should assume that. And the integration of efficiency and electrification is part of what is either going to make this work or make it ultimately much more difficult and costly.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. I want to say that we have a whole host of questions that we're not going to be able to get to because we're running out of time. Real briefly, because I think this is a fairly broad one, could you just weigh in a little bit, on a personal level of what lessons that you specifically have learned from looking outside of California, perhaps to New York, Japan, Denmark, et cetera. What kind of inspiration have you have taken? And unfortunately, we have to wrap up in just a couple of minutes. So please go ahead.
You're going to want to talk about the New York Power Authority, I bet.
Well, yeah, I came out here just 3 years ago. So the first 20 years of my career was on the East Coast, and first thing I started to look at it, there's so much opportunity for us to learn from each other, and very often in regulatory proceedings, for example, we're all starting from scratch, and so heat pumps and building electrification is a perfect example. On the East Coast, due to a lot of gas supply constraints, it's forced utilities and customers to really get creative with how to electrify heat in a way that's efficient and cost effective. And so when we are looking at how do we expand electrification of heat in California, we shouldn't start at the beginning of, okay, let's create some new application and start with a blank Word document. Let's pull what other commissions and other jurisdictions have already approved, right? They've already demonstrated some, cost prudence, and so let's borrow on the work of hundreds of hours of consultants and lawyers and everybody who participates in this that other jurisdictions have agreed to, and I think we can expedite some of the creation and the evolution of our programs by doing that.
Thanks, Jill.
Kelly's question is a reminder that Californians are notorious for their insufferable sense of self-importance. And I agree with her that there are, for me, the region that is constantly challenging us and often outperforming us is the Pacific Northwest, which has 4 decades of experience with energy efficiency and demand response, a superb demand side management ecosystem, as some have called it, with institutions like the Northwest Power and Conservation Council, the Regional Technical Forum, the Northwest Energy Efficiency Alliance. Periodically, we entice them down here to tell us how we can do better, and I've always benefited from those opportunities.